What if the worst thing that ever happened to your voice turned out to be the very thing that made you a legend? That's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what happened to one Welsh coal miner's daughter, who almost lost her voice completely, and came out the other side sounding like nobody else on earth. On July 8, 2026, the world lost that voice for good. Bonnie Tyler passed away at 75, just weeks after doctors had pulled her out of a medically induced coma following emergency surgery in Portugal. Only months earlier, Total Eclipse of the Heart had crossed 1 billion streams on Spotify. Fans were still holding out hope she'd bounce back, the way she always had. Then, on a July night in Faro, that hope ran out. Tributes came pouring in from everywhere. Wales, London, the US, all over. Radio stations and playlists lit up with Total Eclipse of the Heart and Holding Out for a Hero, as people said goodbye the only way that felt right, by singing along one more time. Here's the thing about Bonnie Tyler's voice. You knew it in half a second. That gravelly, raw, ready to crack but never does power was unmistakable. And get this, she wasn't born with it. It came from a surgery she thought had ended her career before it even really started. Instead, it built the sound that defined a generation. But there's a much bigger story behind It's a Heartache and Total Eclipse of the Heart than just chart numbers. It's the story of a working-class girl from South Wales who left school as a teenager, sang for beer-drinking crowds in clubs, got written off more than once, and kept coming back anyway. She was born Gaynor Hopkins on June 8, 1951, in the small village of Skewen, near Swansea, South Wales. One of 7 kids. Her dad had served in World War II and came home to work the coal mines. Her mum ran the household. 7 kids crammed into a small council house. Money was tight, but there was no shortage of noise or laughter. Nobody in that house was dreaming about stadium tours. Fame wasn't even on the radar. But music found her early, through church. Young Gaynor sang in the choir, learning to blend her voice with others and hold a tune in front of people. At home, she'd play her older siblings' records for hours. She loved Sinatra. She loved Elvis. And like every kid in Britain back then, she watched the Beatles take over the world. As a teenager, 2 singers grabbed her especially, Janis Joplin and Tina Turner. 2 women famous for voices that hit you right in the chest. Years later, Bonnie would say they shaped everything about how she approached singing, long before her own voice would take on that famous rasp. Now, school wasn't really an option for long. At 16, she left and took a job at the local grocery store. No formal vocal training, ever. She learned by listening, mimicking, adjusting. That's actually part of why her sound stayed so raw and real. She was never boxed in by textbook technique. The real turning point came at 17. Her aunt entered her into a local singing contest. She placed second, not first, second, but it didn't matter. Standing on that stage, she realized singing wasn't just something she liked doing. It was what she wanted her life to be. That decision didn't hand her overnight stardom. It kicked off years of grinding it out in small Welsh clubs, slowly turning Gaynor Hopkins into somebody the world would eventually know as Bonnie Tyler. She sang backup for a band called Bobby Wayne and the Dixies, then formed her own group, Imagination, playing dance halls across South Wales. Somewhere in there, she even performed under the stage name Sharon Davis, just trying to carve out an identity beyond the girl from the grocery store. Night after night in working men's clubs, she learned to read a room, switch between ballads and rockers on the fly, and hold a crowd's attention for hours. That grind built her stage presence, but it was also quietly wearing down her vocal cords, years before anyone knew it would matter. Her big break came in 1975, when a talent scout named Roger Bell caught her performing in Swansea and introduced her to producer Dave Mackay, who was hunting for fresh talent for RCA Records. Finally, someone was evaluating her as a professional, not just another club singer. But there was a hiccup. The stage name she'd been using was already taken. So, as the story goes, she and her team grabbed a newspaper and pieced together a new name from what they found. Just like that, Bonnie Tyler. No branding meeting, no market research, pure chance. Nobody in that room had any clue that random newspaper name would become one of the most recognizable voices in rock and pop history. Her first single barely made a ripple. But Lost in France, released in late 1976, cracked the UK top 10 and got her onto Top of the Pops. Not an explosion, but proof RCA hadn't wasted their bet. The follow-up kept her afloat, but didn't break new ground. And meanwhile, her voice was starting to strain under the pressure of constant touring. What she figured was just tiredness turned out to be vocal cord nodules. Doctors told her, surgery, or risk losing her voice for good. The operation happened in 1977, and recovery meant total silence for weeks. For someone whose entire life revolved around talking and singing, that was brutal. By some accounts, she couldn't quite manage it. At one low point, in frustration, she shouted, which may have done even more damage to her vocal cords. When her voice came back, it wasn't the voice she'd had before. It was rougher, deeper, more powerful. And at first, she was convinced her career was finished before it had really begun. She could not have been more wrong. That new, damaged, unforgettable voice is exactly what made It's a Heartache the hit it became in 1978. Top 5 in the UK, top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, a smash in dozens of countries. Overnight, Bonnie Tyler wasn't just a promising British singer anymore. She was international. The very thing she thought had ruined her became the reason millions of people could pick her voice out after just a few notes. But then came the classic problem. How do you follow a song that big? RCA kept churning out material, and Bonnie kept touring and recording, but nothing hit like It's a Heartache again. She did land a big international win, though. The Grand Prix at Japan's Yamaha World Popular Song Festival in 1979. Proof her appeal reached well beyond the UK and US. Still, behind the scenes, she and RCA were pulling in different directions. They wanted to lean into country pop. She wanted something bigger, more dramatic, more rock. Sales slid. Some critics started tagging her as a one-hit act, a label that's ended plenty of careers. Rather than play it safe, Bonnie walked away from RCA. Bold move, considering her career was cooling off with zero guarantee anything better waited on the other side. But that gamble led her straight to the man who'd redefine her sound entirely. Jim Steinman, the songwriting force behind Meat Loaf's Bat Out of Hell. CBS wasn't thrilled about the pairing, thought Steinman was way off-brand for her. Steinman himself wasn't especially interested at first either, but Bonnie pushed to meet him anyway. When they finally connected in New York, Steinman didn't jump straight into business. He wanted to actually understand who she was and what music she genuinely loved. Eventually, he sat down at the piano and played her a melody, just the two of them, no polished demo, no big production. Bonnie later said she knew instantly. This was the sound she'd been chasing her whole career. That song was Total Eclipse of the Heart. Steinman had originally written it for a vampire-themed musical. When he handed it to Bonnie, he kept every ounce of its drama and built the recording massive. Power Station Studios in New York. Top-tier musicians, layers upon layers of instrumentation, building toward one climax after another. Bonnie had to match that scale emotionally, line by line. And the surreal music video became a staple on MTV, helping the song explode worldwide. When it dropped in 1983, it went to #1 in the UK, the US, and plenty of other countries, eventually selling tens of millions of copies. Grammy nods, Brit Award nods. Bonnie was suddenly ranked among the great rock and pop voices of her time. The album it came from, Faster Than the Speed of Night, made history as the first #1 UK album by a British woman. Then came Holding Out for a Hero, another Steinman anthem, written for Footloose, arguably even more relentless than Total Eclipse. It became a staple of movies, TV, and commercials for decades. In under 2 years, she'd completely reinvented herself. From a fading country pop act to the voice of the grand, larger-than-life power ballad. The chapters after that weren't as explosive, but they weren't nothing either. She kept working with major songwriters, kept releasing records, and when American interest cooled in the 90s, she simply pivoted, teaming up with German producer Dieter Bohlen, and finding massive success across Germany, Austria, Norway, and Scandinavia. She built an entire second career in Europe that most people outside the continent never fully clocked. Honors followed: the Echo Award, Goldene Europa, and more. She kept going well into her 70s. A Eurovision appearance for the UK in 2013, a French-language reworking of Total Eclipse that hit #1, decades after the original. New albums as recently as the 2020s. Every solar eclipse, streams of that song would spike all over again, proof it had outgrown hit single status and become something closer to a piece of shared culture. Off-stage, her life looked almost nothing like the chaos so often tied to music stardom. She met her husband, Robert Sullivan, back in the late 1960s, long before anyone knew the name Bonnie Tyler. They married in 1973, a full decade before Total Eclipse made her a household name. She always said that timing mattered. He fell for her before the fame, so fame never got between them. They kept their marriage almost entirely out of the tabloids for over 50 years. They faced real heartbreak too. An early miscarriage that meant they never had biological children. But rather than turn that loss into a headline, they quietly built a life full of nieces, nephews, and godchildren instead. In 2022, she was made a member of the Order of the British Empire for her contribution to music, over 4 decades after It's a Heartache first put her name on the map. Even in her 70s, retirement wasn't in her vocabulary. She kept touring, kept recording, kept showing up. So what's left behind? A voice nobody could copy, built out of an injury she thought would end everything. A reminder that a so-called flaw, something rough, imperfect, undeniably human, can become the very thing people fall in love with. Bonnie Tyler spent more than 50 years proving that setbacks aren't the end of the story. Sometimes they're just the beginning of a much better one. If this story moved you the way it moved us, give it a like, drop a comment about your favorite Bonnie Tyler song, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Ricky Skaggs.